on to our program tonight. It is my pleasure to introduce our distinguished panel. We are unfortunately missing Lupita Reyes this evening, who is under the weather, and she sends her regrets. So first I'd like to introduce Paul Van Kolken, a longtime volunteer here at the museum. Paul graduated from Michigan State University in 1960 with a journalism degree. He began his career at WHTC and moved to the Associated Press in 1965, where he worked in Detroit, Grand Rapids, and then Albany, New York. Paul returned to Holland in 1970 to join the Holland Sentinel, retiring as the city editor in 1989. Cassandra Lybrink is the Michigan Outstate Content Director at Gannett, where she guides collaboration between reporters at 15 papers in Michigan. She is the local editor for the Holland Sentinel and the Livingston Daily Press and Argus. She holds a bachelor's degree in journalism from Michigan State University with a concentration in media marketing. And Gary Stevens has been in broadcasting since his college days at the University of Detroit in 1978. After stints at WMAX in Saginaw and WFDF in Flint, Gary joined WHTC and has been the news director for over 22 years. He has hosted WHTC Talk of the Town since July 2019. He has won several Michigan Association of Broadcasters Awards and is a past president of the Detroit Sports Broadcaster Association. So welcome and thank you to all of our panelists this evening. We're so glad to have you here. And I'm going to be our question asker. Not what I usually do with these programs, but we're going to give it a try. So again, thank you all for being here. So I have questions for the entire panel, and we'll take turns. So I thought I would start out with having each of you share a little bit more about yourselves, but also talk a little bit about how did each of you get interested and started in journalism or media. So Paul, why don't we start with you?
Okay. Well, I've always enjoyed writing, even when I was a kid in elementary school, junior high, I had no difficulties writing themes. But the surprise happened the year I graduated, 1954. Paul, from a gentleman who identified himself as John Klunkel, and he was chief engineer at radio station WHTC. And he wanted to know if I'd be interested in joining their staff. He'd been recommended to me by a former teacher. And I said, well, what does it involve? Well, come on down and we'll tell you all about it. So what it was a part-time job on Sundays from 3 in the afternoon until 11 at night as audio engineer, which required a third-class FCC license, so I could look at the dials on a transmitter and keep them every half hour long, and play records and tapes and so forth, depending on what the announcer wanted. So, well, that was good. That helped me go through whole college. For a couple of years, I had summertime work. Then I finished 2 years, sophomore year. I worked full-time at the station, got an announcing and engineering job for the evenings. Did that for about 14 months, and then went to Michigan State, and then still came back to the station for a part-time summer. So it's at the station that I joined forces with the Associated Press correspondent in Grand Rapids. It was a membership and volunteer news organization, so you shared your local news with the AP. So we had a pretty good working relationship. And then one day he asked me if Detroit had called. I said, no, why would Detroit call? And he said, well, there's an opening. If you're interested, call Detroit. AP was not in those days going after employees and routing their member newspapers and radio stations. You had to make the call. Well, all right. And they said, yes, we have an opening if you're interested. Come and go through the interview process. Prior to this, I had already made an application to go back to Michigan State and earn a master's degree in documentary filmmaking. So I get called into Detroit, Diana comes with me, we do the interview process, and we go back home. And we look at each other and we say, well, one way or the other, we're going to leave Holland, Michigan. And yes, Detroit called and said, come work for us at AP on the broadcast desk, writing copy for radio and television stations. So we did that for a year and a half. Got transferred to Albany, New York, to handle their radio broadcast bureau, which they located 7 miles upriver in Troy. There's a whole story behind that, which I will not get into. And that involved another year and a half working with AP. Until they said, maybe you ought to go down to, where was the third place? Well, that was Detroit, Grand Rapids. That was in between times. That was fun because I was coming back home. And I knew the people. You know, we had some good rapport with the people that were members. A couple big stories out of Grand Rapids at that time. This would have been in '67. The salmon fisherman that drowned. Great Lakes was pestered by saltwater fish that ate up all the native fish. And the DNR then planted freshwater salmon. And it took a couple of years for the development. Finally, in the fall of this particular year, they opened it up to fishing. And boy, was there a flood of fishermen that left Frankfurt Harbor. The only problem was there were storm warnings issued. Coast Guard can't stop you from going into the water. They went in by the droves. It's a Saturday. I get a call from Detroit that something's going on in Frankfurt. They pulled a photographer out of Detroit from a football game, sent him up there with some staff from the Free Press, and they got me up there. My Grand Rapids Press had chartered a flight so they could fly over the beach area and take pictures of the boats. And they said they're holding the plane for you, so get up there. And it turned out to be a 2-day event, so we had no overnight accommodations, except to sleep in with a crew from the Free Press. Well, okay. Yes, in the end, 23 fishermen drowned because of the rough waters, and they were ill-equipped. A lot of them were amateurs, really, rowboats and so forth. But all of the bodies were taken to Traverse City Coast Guard, so all identification had to be made. That was not nice.
Well, we'll get in. I was going to ask about some exciting stories, so we'll get back to that. So, why don't we have Cassandra talk a little bit about how you got into the field, and a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, so journalism was actually never my full-time job plan. I always wanted to be a writer. My plan was to go to college, get a degree in journalism, because the journalism degree is really versatile. You can work in journalism, marketing, content writing. It gives you options for jobs should wanting to be a full-time author not work out. So I went to New York University my freshman year, and then tuition went way up in a school that's already one of the most expensive in the country. So I came back to my little humble Midwest home and transferred to Lansing Community College for a semester, and then Michigan State University, where I finished up. Which was a great journalism school, but I still did not leave with any intention of working in a newsroom. I was always in awe of everything they did. I'm in awe of hearing these stories. But newsrooms, by the time I graduated, didn't really look that way anymore. And so my intention was to freelance. My husband and I got married in our semester of college. And we were looking for a place to live, to have kids, start a family, and he asked me what I wanted in a place, and I said, well, I'd like to have a nice downtown and really nice businesses that work with each other, and something that's on the map a little bit. I don't want it to be landlocked, and I don't want to be like a big city, but a small, tight-knit town that's known for something. He goes, so you want to live in Holland? And I said, what's Holland? And he goes, the place with tulip time. And I said, what's tulip time? And he goes, there's like millions of tulips, and they dance around in wooden clogs. And I'm like, oh, you're just making this up. And he's like, no, I swear to God, I'm not. And he brought me out here that day, and we fell in love with it. And we moved here. here, and it just so happened that as we were planning to move out here, Sarah Leach, the then just editor of the Sentinel, was looking for freelancers. And I said, well, I'm doing a lot of freelance business writing. I could do some freelance business stories for you. And next thing I know, the business reporting position is up and up. And I said, well, I could do that. And so that's where I started 5 years ago. I started in the business reporting position, and my predecessor, Austin Metz, gave me my first assignments before he left the paper. And 5 years later, I hired back Austin Metz for the business reporting position and moved him into management where I am now. And now I run 15 papers in my hometown paper in addition to my new hometown paper. So it all worked out in the end.
Like Cassandra, I'm on the other side of the state, born and raised in the city of Detroit. And for those who have listened to Talking Town for any period of time, yeah, I do know a thing about music, and that's what got me started in radio. We had a couple of pretty good radio stations in the Detroit area, CKOW, WKNR. I became aware of radio in 1965, so I was a little behind you on that. And I love sports, but I knew early on I was not going to have the coordination to perform. So I wanted to be a sportscaster. 1970, I wanted to be a sportscaster. It was in Flushing after the Tigers won the World Series in '68. And I went to my high school, went to the University of Detroit with the focus of being a sportscaster. Took classes, but I also was aware that needed to broaden myself. You can only talk so much. You gotta be able to write. You gotta know the business a little bit. During my time at U of D, took advertising classes, television classes. I was a history minor, and all of that has tied in to what I've done since, well, I started in business in '78 as a junior at the University of Detroit. Became a member of the Detroit Sports Broadcasters Association a couple of weeks after I turned 20. Still the youngest person ever to get into that organization. It's now known as Detroit Sports Media. In '86, I became its youngest ever president. Wasn't ready for it. I look back at it now, and thank goodness I didn't run the organization into the ground. Others did after. But I worked for a couple of firms in Detroit. Landed on my feet eventually in '93 at WMAX in Saginaw. Spent 3 years commuting 100 miles a day, one way, Detroit, east side of Detroit to Saginaw, 5 days a week. Burned through 3 cars. Did a little broadcasting for a minor pro hockey team in Saginaw. Then went to Flint in '98. Spent 3 years there, was let go on Labor Day of 2001. 8 days later was 9/11. So I was watching it on the tube with a lot of people, and about 3 weeks later, opportunity came to come to Grand Rapids, apply for a job there. Didn't get it. The person who did get that job left here at WHTC. I said, okay, I'll take it. 6 weeks, maybe 3 months, and I'll land on my feet somewhere else. There was some pressure back in Saginaw for my son and his mother. Get home. Didn't work that way. And I've been here since 01. Met my wife here. But my life here. Some of you who've listened to it know that I'm not afraid to profess my faith when I'm on the air. And it was the best move I ever made, is to come here. Might be my last job, I don't know. I don't know what my Lord and Savior has in mind for me. But, you know, I'm just happy to do what I'm doing. I'm happy Teddy and Steve is here. Paul could talk about some of the early days at the station. Patty just retired in June. She has more stories about the station. And the person who should be here, we lost him 7 years ago. taught me a lot. And I'm glad to say he's one of the 2 Hall of Famers I worked with. Well, now 3. Peter Tanz got in this year, but Juke and Les Moss, my news director, who I learned a lot of doing this job from him. We worked together for 3 years in Flint.
Great, thank you. So, starting with what actually Paul kind of got us started on that, is that I did want you all to share, a memorable story or event that you covered in the news, and it can be here in Holland, it can be elsewhere. So, whichever one of you wants to go ahead and chime in there.
Go ahead, Paul.
Just one?
Just one. After such a long career, yes, you're going to have to pick just one.
Well, one of the funniest ones was in Detroit. There was a series of UFO sightings south of Detroit, and they were by some reputable people like commercial airline pilots, sheriff's deputies on the ground, etc. And so finally the Air Force decided they were going to send their head guru on UFO sightings to Detroit to investigate. His last name was Heinrich. And he spent some time there and, built it around, and then went back to where he goes to mull over the stuff. And then, I don't know, several months later decided it was time to tell the public now of what he found. So he called a press conference at the Detroit news, the press offices. And I went along with the reporter, and my duty was to go to one of the phone booths. Didn't have, cell phones in those days. And to hog the phone booth until the press conference was over, and then you would hand the phone number to the reporter. So it took a while, maybe 20 minutes or so. The reporters come out and they're laughing away, and I said, okay, what did Heinrich say it was? And the report was swamp gas. Okay, I mean, he's the expert. He knows. One of the saddest stories I covered at the Sentinel in my 18-year tenure here. The Sentinel had a ruling, I guess, that a person was killed in a violent way, like a traffic accident. We'd always do a personality piece on the victim, which meant go back and talk to the family and get some information about the person's life and involvement in the community, if there was any, and et cetera, et cetera. And on this particular occasion, the victim happened to be a 7-year-old girl. I think it was she was killed in an auto accident. Okay, we started calling the mother to see if we could talk to the victim. Yeah, she was a cooperative. I said, by the way, can you tell me who the teacher is that taught her, which elementary school, and could you call her and see if I might interview the teacher? Okay, that was done. We talked to the teacher, got some background information. And then I wanted to talk to one of the friends of the victim. So I was able to talk to the mother, who then did let me talk to the daughter. And I said, well, what things did you do? How did you play together? What were some of the memories you had? I wasn't going to go in and say, you're going to be sad that you lost your friend, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to go find out how they played together. And she said, well, we would go to Texas. We have relatives in Texas. And she said, one of the things we loved to do was to run in the fields and catch snakes. Okay, all right. And there were a few other things, things we incorporated that. But, I was pretty emotional. And I said thank you to her and waited a few moments and had a little wash my face. And then come back and, you tell yourself, I'll write the damn story. That was one of the highlights.
Well, after that I want to tell a happy story. And sometimes you have those. Sometimes you have, I remember a couple of years ago, someone stole some wooden shoes that people painted for tulip time. Our headline was Compton Heist, and it was our favorite headline ever. But you take the good with the bad, and I think every reporter has their Everest that they have to climb. My boss right now, my mentor, Sarah Leach, she she's planning her own Everest right now with Ottawa County politics. But my Everest came in 2020, in November of 2020, when a certain restaurant over on Lincoln did not close during the restaurant shutdown, and that is Marlena's Bistro. And that was by far the wildest, craziest story I've ever covered, and I say that from my 5 years of experience in business reporting, but it was pretty wild, and just all of the follow-ups with all of it. So, I mean, if any of you aren't aware, you know, when the restaurant shutdowns came, you know, there were restaurateurs across the state who said, we need to make money, we need to operate, so they stayed open. And I don't think any of them ever took it quite this far, but we got our first reports that the restaurant was open, and I'm like, all right, I'll drive out there and cover it, so I did. And got photos of the signs on the door, and but it went a little beyond just not wanting to open. It was also not like police officers inside or inspectors inside, and you know, then her attorney wasn't actually a licensed attorney, and he was arrested during a court hearing, and it just kept getting, there was a Burger King reference by a judge, it just kept getting crazier the further it went on, and my biggest regret in that case is I so badly wanted to interview the restaurant owner to get the story from both sides. It's our job, it's what we love to do, and so it's always hard, especially in these times where things are so politically it's very hard to convince someone you don't have an ulterior motive when you're trying to do your job as a journalist these days. So I think that is my one regret from covering that story, is I wanted that profile, right? But that would be, I mean, dozens of pieces on that case. We're still getting stories on that case as the appeals still go through the courts. So that was my crazy story.
Hard to say one particular one, because unlike Cassandra and Paul, in the broadcast field, you can't spend a lot of time on one story. You've got basically 5-minute newscast you have to film, and you got to do one again 5 minutes later, 25 minutes later. A lot of stories you guys can cover. It's nice when it's 7, 8 o'clock at night and you can do your work and all that. It's not so nice at 2:30 in the morning, they're asleep. I gotta get up, because I've got to put together newscasts and be ready for 5:30 in the morning. So my tale on this is not so much story, but the wide variety of people I've had the good fortune to interview. Some notable, some not so notable, as like Cassandra, that I wish, and JR, you have some great photos of me in action, which I appreciate. I have dark hair. But I wish I would have had a photo of me with some Hope students chatting with the writer and political figure and comedian Ben Stein when he was in Holland. 2000, and I want to say 4. I have the recording, and I've played it a couple of times and put the recording on a podcast. But in these parts is one of the, along with John McCain, who I had a chance to chat with in 04, and some of the other people I've had a chance to chat with here has been good. My experience back in Detroit. We had an organization, it was the Detroit Sports Broadcasters Association, and what we used to have is a Wednesday afternoon lunch over at the Detroit Press Club, where we would have writers, broadcasters, breaking bread together. We put away all of the competitiveness, we're working, we got a good camaraderie, and in the days of the 70s and 80s, before we had emails and people, the PR people would come in, try to promote something. I had the good opportunity to interview ice skater Peggy Fleming, the great basketball coach John Wood, There's a photo in my office chatting with Sparky Anderson, who I got to know very well. And 1980, the boxer, Jake LaMotta, made a tour through Detroit, promoting a film he says was going to be great. Absolutely great. You'll love the movie. They were authentic with what they did. This actor, Robert De Niro, was great playing him. Great Juke. I've got known many of the people that were notable in sports in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s. And for me, you have the stories. For me, it's the interviews. There is one thing I will mention about Mr. Van Ars. I hope to be able to fulfill something he never was able to do. To have the sitting governor of the state of Michigan on the other side of the table and talk to the town. The closest he had was a phone interview with Rick Snyder before Governor Snyder came here for a governor's luncheon. I don't know if it will be Gretchen Whitmer or whoever will succeed her, because she's term limited out in 2026. But before I let somebody else take over talk of the town, I'd love to have a city governor across to chat with and have people call in. We'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see.
A worthy goal. I love that. Well, Cassandra, you kind of alluded to some of this. What are some of the challenges of covering news in Holland?
So, Holland sits on the border of two counties. So we have at the Sentinel now, and I mean, you could talk about the number of people we used to have at the Sentinel, but at the Sentinel now we have two full-time reporters, myself and our editor, Sarah Leach. So to explain a little bit of how it works, I'm the local editor. I edit this paper, the Ionia Sentinel Standard, and the Livingston County Daily Press and Argus. Sarah heads up the CCJ North, which is called the Centers for Community Journalism. It's an organization within Gannett that just recently happened this year. And Sarah accepted a job heading up 26 papers. So she heads up 26 papers in Michigan, to get this right, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and South Dakota. She has 6 or 7 local editors underneath her. I'm one of 4 in Michigan. And then I, in addition to editing those 3 papers, head up collaboration between all of the Michigan papers, of which we have 15. So, with that background said, at our paper in Holland, we have myself doing the local editing, we have Mitchell Boatman and Austin Metz doing our reporting, and then we have Sarah Leach, who is immensely helped with reporting here, which obviously she cannot do for all 26 of her papers, but she's based locally, so we had that advantage. However, covering 2 counties, covering Saugatuck, Douglas, Benville, Holland, Zeeland, all the way up sometimes to Grand Haven, is an enormous challenge covering Holland. Over in Livingston, we have 1 county. We covered that county. But in Holland, straddling 2 counties is a huge challenge, especially when you have limited staff, limited resources. To make sure that everyone who reads the Sentinel feels heard and feels that their issues matter. We have a short-term rental issue up in Port Sheldon right now that we're ensuring we cover because a lot of these communities don't have a lot of news options. So we're definitely spread thin. That would be the biggest challenge, I would say. And a challenge on top of it, which is a great challenge to have, is that we're swimming in news all the time. A lot of it very positive. Business, growth, people working together, nonprofits doing wonderful things. And so it's difficult to keep up with all of the good, wonderful things that happen in Holland in addition to some of the not so great. So that's what I would say the biggest challenge is.
Go ahead, Paul, if you want to chat before I go.
Well, I don't have any big challenges anymore.
The joys of retirement.
However, prior to your arrival, and when the Sentinel was still locally owned, we had a very small repertorial staff, maybe 3 full-time reporters, Leo had a staff of many because he had stringers to cover all the teams. But when the transition came in the late 1970s and in the early 80s, when the Butler family that owned the Sentinel sold out to the Stauffer Group, which was a Kansas-based multi-newspaper family-oriented production business. And they pumped a couple $1 million into the Sentinel when they bought it because they added on in addition to the Sentinel, put in a brand new press. We went from hot lead to cold type electronic, thousands and thousands of dollars in new equipment. We had to learn how to enter the computer age. It was a tough transition, but that allowed us to grow the staff. And Gary Colonna was telling me that he thought our staff of reporters alone reached the 20 mark. Now, before that, we only had, like I said, 2 or 3. But the coverage area increased up to Grand Haven and south down to Elling. And we were covering township meetings, school boards, other political organizations. We had a staff that was running ragged, but covering everything that we could. The size of the paper really blossomed and mushroomed. We finally went to a Sunday edition, which I said was never going to go in Ireland, but it did. A lot of the sections were pre-printed, of course. We had to subscribe to a features wire service to fill a lot of the holes in the paper with feature material. A lot of the sections were pre-printed during the week. And at one time, we even printed the Chicago Tribune's Midwest edition. This was in the late 70s, early 80s. I had a contract with them. And when that contract was down, we moved, and of course we had but those are the gravy days.
Yeah.
I think our circulation was in the 20,000s.
Gary.
Challenges. Well, I've never had the luxury of a staff. I've had, Peg worked with me for a couple of years, and was very elegant. But since '01, me, myself, and I. That's my staff. So I have to be judicious. I can't be everywhere at once. And I have to sort of use a little bit of gut feeling more than anything else. What's important. And don't jump to conclusions right away, especially in reporting. I draw a difference between how I report and talk of the town. When I do my newscasts, I put stuff on the website. I try to be straight down the middle. Nothing either way. I try to come up with a nice, opening line. I was taught that way in my journalism classes about having a little bit of a hook to get people to read your article online, or to be able to present a story in a certain light in a newscast. I can comment on the news and talk of the town. So I try to balance that matter. The challenge, and I'm going to say this is a challenge for the industry, not just broadcast, but print as well, is the rise of the citizen journalist. We are seeing not only bloggers, with podcasts, people can come up and if they have good personality, charisma, they can be able to report what they see, probably with not the training that we have had over the years, and maybe not with the responsibility of, you've got to be willing to put yourself behind what you say, what you write. the citizen journalist, it's great, but it also has its pitfalls. I take a look at situations such as this day and age. If something happens, instead of calling for help, not good on my thing. Let's show them, folks. Let's get the let's get the video and let's put it up on TikTok, Snapchat. Facebook is so much for us older people now. They want to be the video recorders instead of doing something, instead of helping. If somebody's hurting, instead of, Exhibit A, George Floyd. George Floyd. Need I say more? It's going to come back to bite us. And it's going to come back to bite people of trying to get the stories, trying to be the next TMZ. Responsibilities we have as professionals in this field is immense. We have to maintain our standards.
I'll follow up on that actually because that's fantastic. I will never forget, I was sitting in my home on the north side of Holland, and there was a man who was hit. This was just a year or two ago. He was hit in the driveway of a business on Clutterman and pinned between two cars, and he was killed. And he was lying there on the sidewalk, dying, and someone was live streaming it on Facebook. And you could see his body in this video, and I just remember looking at that and thinking, who in the world would put something like this? And I'm a journalist, and I would not, and I just remember being horrified by it and thinking, okay, well, someone needs to go write an actual story about this now. And, I just remember thinking this is horrible. But there have absolutely been times where we have specifically written stories because there are rumors going around. During Juke time, there was a rumor that there was an active shooter on 8th Street. And so we called HPD and we said, what's going on? And they said, there's not an active shooter. It was just a guy getting rowdy in a bar. He was gone, no shots fired, everything was okay. And we had to get that online immediately so that people were aware that while this rumor was spreading, it was not true. And so if someone had posted a photo of what their HR rep had sent to them because they worked for a business downtown, and the HR rep had said there's an active shooter, and they posted that photo on Facebook on Holland Informing, so everyone started to panic. And so sometimes it's our job to deliberately prove some of these rumors false, so that what people call fake news these days, right, doesn't get out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, I keep leading me into my questions. To talk a little bit about the biggest changes, developments in journalism since you all started doing it, and obviously that's a different time. So to talk about some of the things that changed over the time that you have been working in the field. And you were just talking about, obviously, the introduction of social media and things like that into the mix.
Yeah. That's probably the biggest aspect of it. Obviously, what Cassandra's been talking about, how her responsibilities have changed within the industry itself. I consider myself very blessed to be working for an organization whose owner has never sold any of his properties. The late Duke Wright never, once Duke Wright got a radio station, he has kept it, and he has not sold it. My previous employer, I was working in Flint for the second oldest station in Michigan. WFDF came on board shortly after WWJ in Detroit. We were in Flint as much of a heritage radio station is WHTC is here. People relied on us, morning news. We had a provocative talk show host who called himself a limousine liberal. And some of the things I've done on Talk of the Town, I've learned from Dave Mark. But the company that owned the station sold it to one of the big national conglomerates. The brother of the owner, one of the owners, one of the brothers came in to Flint, told us everything's going to be fine. We're moving forward. It's a great part of our future. Blah blah blah. Within 6 months, I was out of a job. Why? We have to tear down the radio station so that we can sell it and become what is now Super Talk 910 in Detroit. No, the only thing to Flint is that the signal has to go off, but they're a Detroit station. With the consolidation of a lot of media outlets, print, via broadcast, well, people have got to wear different hats, and it's downsized. We've got to do a lot more. And Michelle, it has left a chasm of reporting that is being filled now by what I would call the citizen journalist. And we're getting to points where there are areas that don't have a local newspaper, that don't have a local radio station or a television station. If something happens, let's hope our friends in Grand Rapids thinks it's worthy enough to cover. That's what I'm afraid of here. If something happens, we're down. I don't know if our friends in Zealand's going to pick up the ball. I don't believe it. I'm not going to comment on that. But how are you going to find out what's going on in the city? That is the challenge in my mind, Michelle.
So did that suddenly get louder? So, like I said, I mean, 5 years in the industry, and I can't even begin to explain how much has changed. So I'm about to say a lot of things, but I will say them with the caveat that it's not necessarily better or worse. There is a caveat. Okay, so when I first came in, we had a 2-story building full of, and this was after 76 had taken over part of the Sentinel building. But when I came in, we had a whole first floor of circulation people, all the offices filled. I'd go upstairs. There was our news section. We had about a dozen people. We had 2 people in a features desk. We had 2 sports reporters. We had a digital director, a managing editor, our editor-in-chief, Sarah Leach. We had 5 reporting positions. And then we had 3 people on a print desk that would design our paper. And then we had a whole series of advertisers behind them. So when I first started working at the Sentinel, it actually surprised me how much I felt like I was in the hustling, bustling newsrooms of old. I left for a year to have my son, and when I came back, it was completely different. While I was gone, the merger between Gatehouse and Gannett happened. So when I first came in, we were owned by Gatehouse. The company is merged, and now we are officially under Gannett. We're a Gatehouse legacy paper is kind of how it's phrased. And COVID completely changed the way that we operated. So we no longer have an office that's open to the public. All of our archives are now here at the museum for access and so that they're safe. We're actually in the process of downsizing the then. So we will still have, fought for this, we will still have an office space downtown, but it will be in a corner of the building along the back, like where you go to like the Tulip Time offices. And that's where our presence will be, and so reporters are able to come work there when they want to. But it's not a requirement. So we meet online every single morning. We do a lot of our interviews via phone, although we do a lot of them in person still. Our photographer was the one who did most of our running around and our shooting in person, and he actually went off to Des Moines, Iowa, so we are hiring for a photographer. Shameless plug. But anyway, so we operate completely differently now, and in some ways, it makes it a lot easier to be efficient doing phone calls or working from home versus a lot of our reporters would spend that time commuting from Grand Rapids. You know, and it saves our reporters a lot of money, and they're able to, you know, some of them even live closer to the area they cover, which is fantastic. So there are benefits to it, but it is 100% different. We don't, I mean, I have the emails for circulation, I have the emails for advertising, and I can get in touch with them that way. When it comes to a day-to-day basis, you know, we don't have a features desk anymore. I talk to my reporters, and I talk to my editor, and I talk to my other reporters and my other papers, and that's how we meet now. It's all on Teams or on Zoom, and so it is very different. Now, the good thing is we're all still just as hands-on in the community as we always were, just not in an office like we always were. So it looks very different that way. I will say social media-wise, I hear the cracks a lot about how Facebook is for the older generation now, but because we're trying to follow our community, the Holland community is actually largely on Facebook, so that's where we do most of our marketing, which works out for me because I'm not a big Twitter fan. And I'm still trying to get used to Instagram, but oh yeah, I suppose it is X now.
Yes.
Yeah, so you know, it's fine. But we do still do a lot of our communication on Facebook. But getting used to how that's impacted, I mean, just the amount of like spam comments that we get on our Facebook posts and things that we have to manage, and things that you would never think of having to manage in the 90s. You know, it's very different from a traditional newsroom in that way. So just in 5 years it's changed. So I'm interested to see how it changes in 5 more years.
Oh, okay.
Well, actually, that's Facebook. That's good to know for our marketing, Ricky, for the museum.
It's more about Facebook than anything else.
It is.
That's encouraging to know. I mean, Paul, you talked about going into the computer age from where you were before that. So that was probably your biggest change and challenge when you were still working at Sentinel.
Yes, because at that point where the change was underway, I think the average age of our staff was about 55 or 60. And to have them train, now they gave us 2 weeks to learn the whole system, to understand what the heck a syntax error was, and coding and all of that good stuff, while still putting out the paper. So the 2 weeks dragged into a 3rd week because we're done. But anyway, the transition came on a week now, it worked out okay.
Yeah.
It was much faster, and of course you needed fewer people than the so-called composing. Hot lead required a lot of people. Now with this new system with offset printing, it was basically photography, casting the pages and a lot of waxed column shreds that had to be pasted down. So it was difficult. When we got the new people in, they were out of college, so they were familiar with what the system was that we were working with, and that transition worked out.
Paul, you were actually incredibly helpful when we were doing research for the Newsflash exhibition, because as we received not only some of all of the books of the newspapers from the Sentinel, we received a lot of the equipment, and Paul was like, "Oh, that's this, and you use it this way, and it does this," and because we didn't know, and so it was really helpful because people don't know what these things are used for anymore. So we really appreciated that.
Everything that was transmitted from the wire services was all done by punch paper tape. We had operators in the different bureau offices that were operating it on a typewriter system, which punched holes in the paper tape, each letter had a certain variety of letters in certain holes in certain positions. And then assembled them in the newspapers, you had a device that now recorded all of that and a lot of chads that you had to clean up after the day. And those went through the linotype, which then came out with exactly every line of type in the lab. Of course, the operators of the linotype wanted to run through more wire service copy than to punch their own local copy. So it was a laborious task to finally get the page put together, and then you had to make the lead castings that went on the press. Now, it was easier to make quick changes if you had a bad lever in the casting. You could stop the press, take a screwdriver, and chip out the lever. And I was told, not before I got there, that they saved the day because they could chip a whole line. Well, if a story had to really go in, especially a local story, they always made the slug line that had to go at the top of the story must. And that slug line should have been taken out in this particular story, which was a wedding story. So here you are, we're running the paper, and someone says, oh, we got to get rid of that line, so that's all you have to do. Press room, just find that good position on the lead casting, chip out the line, and
There you go. So Cassandra, this question's for you, and I was going to share this also with Lupita if she had been able to be here, but what are some of the challenges being a woman in media?
You know, I think a lot of the challenges of being a woman in media are pretty much the same challenges of being a woman anywhere. You know, you don't go to dark interviews by yourself, you take a buddy. I had one interview, sometimes you have interviews that are in people's homes and you don't go along, you take a buddy, and you try not to talk more than everyone else, and you try to make yourself a little bit quieter and a little more humble, and you know, it takes a little more to speak up and try to take charge. You know, but the one thing I will say is people like Lupita, they paved the way for people like me. It is nowhere near as difficult for women in journalism today as it once was. And, you know, like you said, it's pretty much the same as it is in other places, but it is improving. And, you know, one thing I'm really proud of is in Michigan, this paper is female-run. Sarah and I are obviously the management team, and so it's an all-female-run team. And the state at the moment is an all-female-run state, so all of our leadership at the 15 papers we run in Michigan are all female. Not by choice, by how it just happened, but we're very proud of that. So it's, you know, I had one newsroom not long ago that was all women. When I took over the Livingston Daily, it was 3 female journalists there, and it was wonderful. It was wonderful to see so many women in this industry. So it definitely is not as difficult as it used to be, but it's still a lot of, you know, please don't think I'm being offensive, but, you know, and finding your way to the top without offending anybody. But, you know, and sometimes there's being talked down to, sometimes there's condescension. We just take it and you chug on it, as women do. So
Exactly. So, I just have a couple more questions. You've all kind of talked a little bit about someone who you worked with or impacted you. So I just wanted to ask, you know, do you have a favorite journalist or someone that you looked up to or was a mentor to you, and why were they important? Go ahead.
I'll start first, which is not in this area. Obviously, I would say, what about Juke? You know, and he had, but I've been in business for 20-something, 30 years or so before I started working with Juke. But to me, my mentor is the longtime voice of the Tigers. Both. In fact, all 3, if you want to call it that. They all became my friends. Later in Harwell. Ray Lane, who we worked with, that match was 68 year. Still a good friend in the Detroit area. And the late Paul Van. Paul was a mentor of mine. Voice of God. There you can argue from Rhode Island. The voice of God. And I learned not only about business. Learned a lot about life through him. Last time I had a chance to chat with him was in 2010. When Saugatuck made it to the state finals in football. And I had a chance to meet with him at Ford Field. And he shared some things with me, and I shared some things with him. He passed away a couple of years later. But I still think of how he carried himself, how he handled things. An authoritative voice, but also a compassionate voice. To me, he was my mentor, and I know I'm going to see him soon.
Well, I edit her stories these days, so it's a little bit backwards than it should be, but I'd be completely remiss if I did not say that Sarah Leach is my journalism mentor. She took a chance on a newbie journalist and hired me in, didn't even make me take the tests. You know, she's taught me everything I know about management, about life, about raising kids, about work-life balance, about being a woman in journalism, about how to move up in this industry, which, you know, we were talking about earlier. It's learning how to do all the pieces of it so that you stay invaluable to the company that owns you. You know, you learn how to do the photography, you learn how to do the coding, you learn how to do the new programs, and you make sure you're the first one to learn it. You know, and those are all things that I learned at the hands of Sarah Leach. So I'd be completely remiss if I did not say her.
Great. Paul?
Oh, I can go way back. Edward R. Burrow. I looked up to him, you know, as a teenager, and because he had some interesting reports live during World War II when he was based in London, and put together a staff of reporters that were known as the Merle Group, or the Merle Boys, and did live coverage of different aspects of World War II during that particular era. And then when he came back after the war and continued with CBS, he started programs called See It Now, kind of a documentary, today's documentary, which went on to, well, some here now, first radio, and then on TV as Hear It Now. And one of the episodes or programs had to do with Senator Joe McCarthy, who was on a race to get rid of all the communists in the government, and especially the news media and the entertainment media. And Ed put together a long lasting half hour using mostly Joe McCarthy's quotes from previous television interviews, etc., and gave Joe the opportunity to file his own rebuttal, which became part of a half-hour program, which CBS News did not want to air, and neither did the Alcoa Company, which was the sponsor. And I think Ed was pretty well threatened, but his producer, I forget his name now, Fred Bradley, right, stuck together and pushed, and it went on the air. And of course, Joe McCarthy eventually was ostracized.
And I'll just add a little something. My one class at Michigan State University, I aced it. And I aced it because I did this full study of Ed Burrow. Not just his time in the big spotlight with World War II and with CBS, his early days at Washington State University. When in 2015, once I got past, once I got in 2016, I was 56, 58, I says, I beat Ed Burrow. Ed Burrow died at 57, lung cancer. He always had the cigarette. And it was interesting, 57, at 57, Ed Burrow died. At 57, Vince Lombardi died. So I made sure once I got to 2016, my birthday in 2016, I was 58. Okay, I can move on now. Past that mark. But yeah, Paul, you have a good person to follow, a man of his Detective Bill Shirer, one of his borough boys, wrote The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. Douglas Edwards, first television newscast, another one of his boys as well. And yeah, it left a legacy. Why the Tiffany at work was as good as it was. Of course, we weren't at CBS at the time. We were Mutual when we first started in '48.
Great. So I've got one more question before we turn things over to our audience for their questions. So I wanted to ask about the role of photography, photojournalism, and how has that changed in the last, 10, 20 years or so. 5, 10, 20 years. And I'll have each of you answer. And then we also have in the audience with us tonight a local photojournalist, JR, who'll come up and join us in a minute. But I wanted to get your responses to that question first.
Well, photojournalism is still incredibly important. It is unfortunately one of the first jobs that went when the layoffs across the industry started. It is one of the, it continues to be one of the first jobs that gets cut. And it's very unfortunate because not all journalists know how to take their photos. And now we have to specifically ask when we hire reporters, can you take your own pictures? Which just goes back to that knowing how to do every part of the industry, but nobody can do it as well as a professional photographer. I'll go back to Cody Scanlon. We actually had an Around Town series that we ran every week at the Sunday Features page that anchored that page, and he would go to an event that we wouldn't usually have time to cover, and he would go and get photos of kids, playing a D&D game, or model train set show, or the rock and gem and mineral show that they do at the complex. And he went out and got all of those things that we otherwise wouldn't have had time to get. So I'll tell you, as soon as we have another photographer, that's coming back. But we need one. We didn't have a dedicated photographer model for a long time until we hired Cody. We had a digital director who was fantastic, but he had other responsibilities, and so Cody was our first sole photographer in a long time. We were shocked we were even allowed to have him, and we kept waiting for it to go away, and it didn't. And that's because the other papers in Michigan, the Free Press especially, have learned to rely on him for West Michigan coverage when they need him, and he's become a real asset to the state. We were so sad to lose, but we're looking forward to having that again. But it's still incredibly important. It never stops being important, having those high-res photos. And pictures worth 1,000 words is the oldest, saying in the book, but it's true. It's really true, and it's really important that we, keep that in mind as we're making these decisions in this industry.
I think it kind of fits into that what we were talking about earlier with, your citizen journalist. Everybody with a phone, of course, now thinks they're a photographer as well. And yes, you can take some really nice photos with a phone, but again, not everybody's a professional photographer, and you can see the nuances.
Of course, the fun thing about it, and JR can bring this up as well, in this day and age, digital photograph, you don't have to worry about development. And you don't have to worry about running through film and all that cost. If you don't like the shot, delete, and eventually you get the right one. But that's why I will defer to professionals in this regard.
Yes, JR, why don't you come and join us for a couple of minutes here, and then we'll turn our questions over to our audience here.
Okay. Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, photojournalism, as they said, is true. When I got hired back in 2001, it was about a month and a half before 9/11. I was shocked at that time we were still using film at the Holland Sentinel, Walden Grand Rapids Press. Everybody went to digital. We didn't require the digital till 2002, but out of 3 photographers, they only bought 2 cameras, so how is that going to work with 3 photographers? So I got to still use the darkroom using film. And then when we finally got this 3rd digital camera, then we were finally able to compete with each other and don't have to share the camera with everybody again. But over time, digital is better than the film because remember, roll of film, you only have 24 or 36 chances to get it right before the film rewinds itself in the camera. Where now, today, you can have at least 4,000 pictures on one memory card. So you got 4,000 chances versus 36 chances. But in the darkroom, you got 3 photographers, and we're all racing each other back to the office to see who gets access to the darkroom first, because the machine can only fit 3 rolls of film. And if we all shot the Tulip Time Festival together, yeah, there's going to be at least 4 rolls of film for each photographer. Who's going to be the first to get to the computer and scan those negatives in. So that was one battle we had. But the other thing was, like there was, as you were mentioning about the favorite stories, and one part comes to mind that's still in my memory from that time. Do you remember the restaurant Muzzy's? Well, on that day, in I believe it was 2002 or 2003, they went on fire, and we have a scanner right next to the newsroom that's telling from the police department and fire department if it's an accident or a fire scene. The dispatcher just kept saying, "Fire at the old Muzzy's, fire at the old Muzzy's," and no one in the newsroom, except for me and our late editor Jim Timmerman, were the only two that knew what she was talking about. And I said, "Oh, I know what she's talking about. I'm on my way to the scene." But as soon as I got to the scene, I said, "Okay, I don't see no fire flames. All the fire department, the firefighters are right there in the street." And I said, "What are you guys doing?" And all of a sudden, I see them doing this. I said, "Yeah, I smell it too. So are you going to go extinguish it, or are you going to go in and eat? Because if you're going to go in and eat, then I'm going to go join you." What happened was the new owners of the building used a blowtorch to separate the grill, but they didn't know there was leftover grease in that grill after all that time. So that's why it smelled like Muzzy's famous melted cheeseburgers. After nearly a decade of not being cooked for so long. But just trying to go from scene to scene, yeah, have an accident scene, fire scene, photograph politicians visiting, famous people visiting. Just like, for example, Governor Granholm, when she became our first female governor, she showed up to Tulip Time, but she did not show up to Wednesday's parade like normally the governors show up on Wednesday's parade. She showed up for Saturday's parade, and everyone knows Saturday's parade is always the longest parade of them all. So they had assigned me and our reporter David Jesse at that time to follow her from the beginning of the parade route all the way to the end at Holland High School. But the one thing they also said to me, you still have to photograph the parade on your way back. So that was a long walk, but at least it was an experience to remember.
All right, great, thank you.
So to turn things over to our audience, do you have any questions for our panelists? We can share the microphone. Oh, Ricky, yes.
So this is more of a statement than a question, because when we opened this exhibit, journalism and Holland past and present, it was something we were very excited to share. But it was a really unique experience, I think, and we alluded to this on the panel, that this small community has such a great journalism presence. I think we all learned so much. There are so many newspapers, even in major cities, that are completely digital. To get a newspaper, and I'm of the generation that likes that piece of paper to open up and read. I know a lot of others are too. It's really very special. So I congratulate the journalists in the room and everybody else that you represent. So thank you.
Excuse me.
I'm Warren Bruce. I was with the Sentinel in 1960 to 76. Back then we had approximately 500 carriers, and obviously now they can't find anyone. I was in the advertising department, worked with Paul, Randy Vandermark, Al Bransdorf, all those good people. Our Thanksgiving paper was anywhere from 60 to 80 pages.
anymore, really. I did do that when I was a kid for a while, just a little bit. That's his honesty. I couldn't get my kids to get interested in it, but any other questions? Yes, back there.
My name is Cassandra Lybrink, and I was a reporter for the WMAX press from 1990 to 2011. And most of that time was spent at the Press's Lakeshore Bureau, which was on 8th Street at Lincoln. And the building, I think, came down in 2006 or 7, I believe. But we always tried to give the Holland Sentinel a good run for their money. I think it's hard for most people to imagine the attrition, especially in print journalism. When I was hired at the Great Rapids Press in the fall of 1990, I was the 40th reporter in the Metro Division. And now the entire paper has 5 or 6. And so you just look at how difficult it has been to keep newspapers relevant. Cassandra, I don't know how you're covering one city and 2 counties with 2 reporters. You know, it just sounds like a nightmare how can you be relevant. And but just now that I'm a news consumer, I just wish that the old newspapers were back. Because the other day I was driving through Denison and I saw an older man riding a bicycle and hit by the parking lot going into the mire. And there was this huge response for ambulances and stop traffic and all of this. And there was no way to find out what happened. I assume that the gentleman didn't die because otherwise I probably would have been a story. It might have been 3 paragraphs. But I think that newspapers just did such a wonderful job all through the years of tying the community together because you knew these stories. You didn't have to be your next door neighbor. If it was just in your town, you could hear about it. I remember one of the stories we did when I was at the Press's Lakeshore Bureau. A young freshman going to college. I think he was from Wisconsin. He rode with his father on bicycles all the way from Wisconsin around the lake to get to Holland for him to start his freshman year. And then that same fall, he was riding his bike again. Now he's a student in Wisconsin, and a dial-up bus backed him over. Well, there was a huge outcry in the community. I think people here really touched people's hearts that happened. Everyone was so sad about it. Would they have felt the same way if there was no reporter to tell the story about the sacrifice of campaigns and whole ones driving to get to college here because they don't know? And I'm just really sad that because I know we're listening to stories. We're just listening to stories. And back when journalism was a more professional job, and you had to have a 4-year degree at least, and everything, and got my Michigan State journalism grad as well. We were taught ethics, and you don't post a picture of a body even if it's a body of a person that's there. We're trying to be humans here, think of the survivors and stuff like that. And at the press, we always call that the breakfast test. If they can't pass the breakfast test, that's not holding up pages. And then you get someone who's had his broadcast time on this. And you just worry about the ethics not being there anymore. until several years later, when some holes were found near the state park, and they were identified as fur. But even before the scientific test came back, we had 4 reporters in our lakeshore area who had worked there for 10 years and said, "Oh my God, it's fur, she's like a cow." You know, it is that institutional legacy, institutional memory of, okay, that happened, that is what was never solved yet.
Right.
And now we've kind of finally got it. And the current rate is, I think, reporters can only afford to work for 2 or 3 years, and then they've got to go into marketing and they make some more money, because now they've got a family or something, we're going to lose that institutional memory that really don't serve communities.
Yeah, I completely agree. Some of my favorite stories I've ever written for the Sentinel were written because I spent a lot of time down in the archives looking at our previous reporting on things like Gannett Beach Hotel fire and learning about these things that really made our community what they are. Remember when I heard about Genesee Electric Park and Lakewood Farm and Zoo and these stories that so many people who lived here didn't know. And I do think that's so important. Just for Thanksgiving, the only reason I know it does exist is because for Thanksgiving I reached out on Facebook and I said, guys, what restaurants in Holland do you miss? And I spent a lot of time in our archives and working on a piece about 15 restaurants in Holland that we really miss. But you're right. I mean, it's not what it was. We work really hard to stay relevant, to keep up the coverage. But the people in this industry are people who are dedicated to it, not for the money, but because they love it. And people in my job, as a manager, it's my job to keep them here as long as I can. And the people that I have on my team are just so passionate about it. You leave journalism, you wish that you could go back, and we have people who repeatedly do come back because they love it so much, and they love what it is and what they can do with it, and this opportunity to tell these stories that otherwise wouldn't get told. So I completely understand. It's why we all do what we do, and I wish that it was what it used to be. I love hearing these stories. I love hearing what the equipment was used for. I came down to our basement. I didn't know what they would do. I mean, it's wonderful to learn about it, and my job is to help us stay alive for as long as we can. And the best way to do that is to tell enough stories that people don't get anywhere else, that it's worth subscribing to the Sentinel. I will say carriers are hard to find. Shameless plug, we need carriers. I used to deliver papers with my dad when times were tough after the recession. He delivered papers at night as a second job, and I hated him going by himself. I was always scared that he was going to fall asleep at the wheel, and so I spent my spring break going with him to deliver papers every night. And the smell in the car from all the freshly printed newspapers, I remember it so well, and being in that warehouse and rolling them all up and figuring out, we would deliver the Free Press and the Livingston Press and Argus, and being on that side of it, I can understand why people don't want to be carriers, because the brakes only work hard. I very much hope that Holland continues to be a print product for some time into the future, because I love holding the front paper and writing notes. The first thing I do every morning is, well, it used to be I used to go get my Sentinel, but now I look at that e-edition every day and I see what you see, and I make sure that looks the way it should, because that's every bit as important as what you're seeing online, because holding that paper in your hands, there's nothing like that. So,
Michelle, let me add one more thing. Kim, it's a delight to see you.
Good to see you, Gary.
Yeah, Kim, along with Ivan Kukla, Greg Chandler, over at the Press Box, right at the corner of 8th and Columbia. But these people, and you mentioned about David Jesse. Dave became Hoekstra's press man. Was with the Sentinel before that. John Tuggerson and others involved. I wanted to mention, and I'm glad I wanted to get this opportunity, because yes, we're representing right now, and Paul from the past, the future, me. The thing is, though, what you guys did needs to be noted. just as much as what we are doing. And I'm glad to see you. I'm glad I have the opportunity to mention some of the people who have come before us. And some are still plugging away. Greg's over in Hastings, and yes, he'll be over at West Ottawa High School tomorrow night and doing his health leaves. But you know, and then some of the people with us, you know, Scotty Watson's back doing some stuff for us at HTC. Some of the other news people, you know, Amy Watson, my predecessor, you know, Howard Bell, another predecessor of mine for HTC. They should be noted as just as much as what we're doing here tonight.
Absolutely. We just have a couple minutes left, so I want to make sure we stop at 8:30. So we just have a couple minutes to get a couple more questions in here. Yes, go ahead, and then we'll pass it along. Got a couple more.
I think the one story that I really remember working at the Sentinel was 1963 when Kennedy was assassinated. Al Branscover was our city editor at the time, and he had the AD light in his office, or in his office, and the bells went off at about 1 o'clock. We were already at press. He ran back there and said, "Stop the press." Changed the front page to say Kennedy assassinated, and he said to me and a couple of the citizens, "Take these, get out on the street and sound out." And I was on the corner of River and Dave, sounding that way.
Wow.
Very memorable.
All right. Yeah, there's one right here, and then we'll go into the back. Rick in the back. Yeah, go ahead.
So a couple of the things you talked about, I appreciate the way the industry is consolidating. I think it's like a bad thing for news because it's shrinking, and that's a problem. And then you mentioned about like the rise of the citizen journalists, and there's just like, I feel like a major lack of respect for the professionalism that people have. And then hearing a lot of like lamenting tonight about this, right? But we're out here because we're interested in local news, so rather than just go into like, you know, here for the old days, what can we do to be advocates for local news to make sure that it, you know, retains the integrity?
Let the future talk.
It's a great question. Subscribe to your paper. But not just here. Subscribe to, if you don't live here, subscribe to your local paper. I can't encourage it enough when people ask me what they can do, but it's not just that. It's also sharing your local outlets. When these stories go up and people jump in, and we've got statewide outlets and nationwide outlets jumping in on some of our stories, and share your local outlets. You know, that's the most important thing that you can do. But also, just support from the community is so important. I can't tell you how many times, and we always stress that unfortunately we have less control over this than we would like in the news division, but support for your local newsroom and what they're doing is so important, and it's so helpful in keeping journalists in the job. It can often feel like a very thankless job. You know, it's no good deed goes unpunished thing. You'll publish a story you're really excited about, and everyone's mad at you because it's behind a paywall. You know, and that's a very difficult thing. So subscribe to the paper. Encourage everyone else to subscribe to the paper. Say to people who say, "Why do I have to subscribe to the paper?" that we want our paper to be around. And I will clue you all in that if you wait for the right time, we usually always have like a $1 for 6 months deal going. And I don't control any of those deals, but I can tell you they happen a lot. So I encourage you to keep those in mind, but also just vocal support of the journalists and the community is so important, because we really are all here to help. We're not here to push an agenda. We're here to tell the local stories. That's the most important thing. So that's what I would say.
Good. Thank you. Rick.
My favorite part of the paper is a weekly column that appears every Sunday. This weekly column was written by Steve Anderson.
Steve Anderson.
Between the two of you, getting things organized and stuff like that. So,
Well, yeah. Well, Steve reached out to me. Oh my gosh, has it been a whole year? I think it may have been longer. It's been a long time. Time flies. But Steve reached out to me and said, "Hey, I've got all of this history written up, and I would really love to run a history column." We used to have Randy Vandewater, who did some really fantastic work. A lot of the history pieces I wrote put a Randy Vandewater, and I said, oh my gosh, could we have this again? Could we have a modern version of this? And I read some of his pieces, and Steve does fantastic work, and I said, great, we're going to run you every Sunday. And we do, and so he sends it to me once a week, and I have a reporter who puts it in the system for me, and I edit it, and it runs on the Sunday page, and it runs online, and it's a fantastic, wonderful thing to have, and Steve just does it out of the kindness of his heart, and I love that. So, I mean, huge round of applause to Steve Vanderveen.
Excellent question, Rick, and I will piggyback on that with a shameless plug that next month, at the end of January, on January 25? January 25th, thank you. January 25th, Steve will be right here speaking about Isaac Capon as Holland's first entrepreneur, and that came from reading his columns. And finding out about his book. So that's how that program came about. So come back at the end of January and hear Steve. And he'll be kicking off our year of Capon programming. So it is past, it is 8:30, so we are going to close for this evening, but thank you all for being here. Thank you all in the audience. And so thank you for sharing your stories. Thank you for sharing your stories. It's so important at the Holland Museum that we share everyone's stories, and we couldn't do these kinds of things without all of you. So thank you so much, and we appreciate all the things that you do for Holland and for the news. It is a labor of love, and we appreciate you. So thank you so much. So let's give them all another round of applause.